It's the Bat Pod.
Grab your bat microphone, it's time to start the show. Like a court of owls, the mystery is starting to grow. Let there be no debate, it's about to begin. Keen like Bruce Wayne, quick like Tim Drake, fierce like Damien. Grab your headphones, listen up, you know you love it. Drop the facade. Like the Dark Knight detective, they've got some perspective. They're a pure crime-fighting collective. It's the Bat Pod.
Welcome to the Bat Pod. I'm your host, Bill Beer, and tonight we have a couple of special guests here. If you listen to any podcast in the Batman realm that isn't the Bat Pod, if you listen to the Cassandra Cain podcast, if you listen to the Outcasters podcast, you will know Tim Price and AJ Wright.
Hello.
Hey, that's us.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's you.
Hello. I'm happy to be here.
I'm happy to be here as well.
How's it going, guys?
It's going quite well now that we're talking to you, Bill.
That's cool. So, yeah. So, I wanted to have you guys on. I listen to you guys all the time. I had Tim, and we talked about, the Batman and Scooby-Doo issue.
Oh,
Yes, we did.
Probably a
That
year
was
or so
that was
ago.
fun. That
Yeah.
was a fun story.
Yeah, that was a fun book. And they're still doing that. So,
Mhm.
that's been a lot of fun. But I wanted to have you guys on here. I've been doing some episodes where I have podcasters come on. The first thing I asked them to do is give me and people out there can't see this since it's an audio podcast, but they can see me. I cannot see them because we're on Zoom and I'm waving my hands and I do all these gestures. And I just realized I do that by staring at myself. So, but anyway, I want you guys to give me your Batman comic book origins. And AJ, you can start first.
Okay, I'll go first. As far as comic book origins, it didn't happen till late in life. I know somewhere in high school, I don't remember which Bat book it was, but I bought a random Batman comic. I swear it was a hologram. He was in the swamp. He had elongated ears, but it was like some type of hologram sandpaper type cover. That may have been a fever dream. But the thing that really got me into Batman comics, and one of the reasons why, and it's funny enough, I knew when I first started doing podcasting that I was doing things that were like female lead type stuff. It wasn't for a while that I realized, wait a minute, and all of these are Batman characters. They're Batman adjacent. So that took a while, and then we put the cherry on top with Batman the Outsiders. But the thing that made me really lock in on Batman and taking a deep dive and a slow descent into that world is Batman No Man's Land.
That's a good one. That's a good one to jump into. It goes in many directions. And we're going to talk about that coming up because I think that was your pick for this episode to talk about. Tim, how about you? What was your Batman comic book origin?
Well, I'm going to cheat because it's one of those things where it's hard for me to remember a time before I knew about Batman because I know I have memories before I even started kindergarten of seeing cartoons with Batman on it on our little black and white TV set. Yes, I'm of an age where we actually owned a black and white TV set. Just so you all know. Yeah, I'm old.
Same.
And this would have been like the small shorts that were like made by Filmation well before Super Friends and were shown on interspersed with other TV shows like the Bozo the Clown show or other kids programming like that, where they'd have this little 10-minute Batman or Superman cartoon thrown in. So I don't remember a time before I knew who Batman was. Batman's always been part of my DNA. The first significant thing, though, I can think of where I would have had a Batman in comic book form would have been actually the hardcover Batman from the 30s to the 70s book that one of my parents got for me when I was little. And I used to read that thing cover to cover. I'm pretty sure that I was in kindergarten or first grade, and one of my folks came in the middle of the night to tell me, turn off the light and put that book away and go to bed. And I was like, what? I've only been reading for a little while. It's like, it's 2 a.m. Go to bed. It's like, whoa. So yeah, I was pretty sold on Batman early on. And it's like, oh yeah, that went straight into watching the Super Friends. And I had my own Batman comic book collecting. I buy an issue here and there. I wasn't really collecting in depth until really I had so many old comics that were like gifted to me that were new to me that I reread all the time for free. So I just never had any new comics, and they weren't any superhero comic books. But I've discovered my first comic book shop like in 1985, and that same visit had Batman: The Dark Knight Returns on the stands. So that's really where my Batman comic book collecting began. Went straight from that to the regular series and continued for quite some time. So that was quite an interesting jumping on point, shall we say,
Yeah, I
for
would say.
Batman as a comic book series.
Right, exactly.
Very different from 30s to the 70s.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. Although I appreciate a lot of different eras, but that's a big difference. you go there. So I had a store, and I mentioned this before on previous episodes. It was like a video store, half comic book store. That's in the 80s. That's where I first discovered, the comic books. And again, I was kind of like you, Tim. I didn't pick up like every issue. It was only like once in a while. Whenever you got to the store, it wasn't like, I knew it was before I could drive, so it wasn't like every month I went there and got every issue, but I get an issue here, an issue there, and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, and fibbing a little bit, it's like I was also big into team books and comics. So before I got to the comic shop, I was starting to buy things off the stands, and team books were more my thing because I got to see as many characters as possible.
Right.
And that's what, that's how I got on the ground floor on Batman and the Outsiders in 1983. So it's like, but seeing just Batman in a solo series, I was just not what I was trying to purchase at the time.
Right. Yeah. So since I have you guys on here, I find it very interesting to find out how guys or gals or whatever got into podcasting. So how did the Wright On Network start up? What was, I know you said you jumped on with No Man's Land. Was that the beginnings of how the Wright On Network started?
So this was interesting. The Wright On Network is started because I wanted, like I have a background in radio and television. So I think I was destined to do podcasting at some point. And I knew that when I first started learning about podcasting, I was listening to some things that were DC related and Doctor Who related. So I knew I wanted to do a Doctor Who podcast and about about birds of prey. Now, the thing is, with my trajectory, when I was in elementary school, junior high, I didn't read comics. I was afraid of them. So I just read books instead. I thought comics, like, oh, it's complicated. It's a members only club. It's not something I could really get into. And then in high school, I would read things where someone said, hey, check this out. Or someone would put something in my hands. I remember it was like the Batman Spawn crossover. I remember I started reading Spawn because it was something kind of new. So it's like, okay, I don't need to know any background. I can just jump in. And then I would read indie comics like Stray Bullets, that kind of stuff. Now, I think even in high school, with not knowing that podcast would be a thing, but with my trajectory, I would do some type of podcast. But really, most people that put things in my hand were Marvel related stuff. I like New York 1990s rappers. They would usually make references towards Marvel. So I think, and then in the 2000s, I was reading like that Ultimate Universe. I think if it were not for that Batman No Man's Land, I would be doing either a Fantastic Four podcast or an X-Men podcast. That No Man's Land ruined everything. It ruined everything.
Right.
Like the fact that I'm like doing because I do mostly DC centric stuff. If it weren't for that No Man's Land, that would have never happened.
That's a pretty big impact there. So.
And I would have been a happier person. Now, you get looked at with suspicion for like, you like DC stuff. What? Huh? Like, you're very suspect with people now.
Yeah. So I know that was the book, or that's the story that I asked you both to pick a story, and that's the one you pick. We might as well just jump right into that since we're discussing that. No Man's Land. I don't think there's ever been anything like that that I've seen, any crossover like that. I don't think we've seen that since or seen anything like that before. It's just, it was such of amazing, and people can have a bunch of different feelings about that, but overall, I loved it. I loved it. And I had been reading for a while, but as you said, that was your jumping on point. So what led you into that?
So, okay. The only thing I don't remember it, but the closest thing that gives me the same feeling as No Man's Land is whatever story where Daredevil was in prison. I don't know if you guys read that one, but whatever that was, I remember that having like the same feel to me from what I remember. But it was 2003. It was after my first year of teaching, and it was horrible. And then that summer, I did two things in 2003 summer. I got into the British Office, and I was just reading comics like crazy. And I remember reading Batman No Man's Land because, like Tim was saying, like you can't remember a time when you didn't know what Batman was.
Mm-hmm.
So from a pop culture standpoint, like you get like the Batman 66, you get that, you get the Michael Keaton's Batman. So it's always with you. It's just a part of you, your DNA.
Right.
But when I started understanding, like, oh, he's a detective. He is a planner. He's thinking things out. Oh, and I just remember like that's what attracted me. And with Batman No Man's Land, it had that we're going back to basics kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
No tech. I'm not going to be using Oracle. I got to do this from the ground up. I thought it was sexy when Superman came in. He was like, oh, it can't be a quick fix. This is going to take time. I was like, oh, yeah, you got to have these contingency plans and think things out. And then you do prevention type stuff. And then I kind of took that to the classroom. And like my second year, it was a dramatic renaissance. And people call me Batman, all this stuff. So that's what did it. And also with Batman too, it was a pan across the Batman universe. You saw the ancillary characters, you saw the rogues gallery, you were able to see the rogues that's not a part of pop culture, but you know them if you're in the Bat universe. So, you always think about like, oh, how would a new reader take this? Well, I was one of those folks where I was a new reader and I took it well. And actually, I never looked back. And I guess that's how I end up backdooring into loving the Huntress and backdooring into loving Nightwing. And also, that's one thing I think that's attractive. I think what's attractive is time going by. Like, hey, okay, so Nightwing, so Dick Grayson was a teenager and now he's a young adult. And then so instead of always do this, I need to stop picking on him, but instead of Bart Simpson being 11 for 40 years, like, it's progression. You get Pebbles and Bam Bam, and then you get those ones when they're teenagers and they're in a rock band. Like, I love that when they do that. There's a couple of episodes of Simpsons where they're older and they're in the future, and I always find them interesting. But yeah, that whole thing where there's a legacy of Robins and Nightwing, maybe one time he might become the Batman. But yeah, definitely No Man's Land. And and that ended up being the genre later, whereas like currency, what's currency? Well, I have batteries. Well, those batteries don't matter if you don't have the actual flashlight. Okay, apples. You can't grow apples here. So where did you get that? Oh, the penguin, he funneled those in. So having a $7 or $100, that doesn't mean anything. But having a bag of apples, that's like gold. And then all of a sudden, like a decade later, you get the zombie genre where, it's about zombies running around, but it's really about like human nature. And, if you know how to make pipes and water run through it, then you're valued instead of the lawyer. What was going on in Batman's No Man's Land, that ended up taking over television for like the next decade.
That is true. I didn't think about that, but that's definitely true. And other stories, there's other stories that come out. It's not called No Man's Land. There was like a Vertigo book, DMZ. Very similar.
I've heard about that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So no, there was one moment in that book that it still hits me today when I reread it. There was one moment that hit, and it was, I don't know, in the middle to at least halfway through is when Batman gathers everybody around. He gathers everybody around and says, I need your help.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if we ever seen a time that he had, Cassandra King was there, and he didn't know if he really trusted her or not. And he gives her the uniform. Dick is there, and Tim, and I think Azrael was there. For me, that was a moment in that book that I really loved, to see him ask for help and him have, all these members of his Bat family.
What about the simple thing of Bruce Wayne? He walks off, and this minion, low-level gang member or whatever, a henchman, threatens to shoot him, and he goes, well, bullets are rare. They're here in no man's land. They wouldn't give that to you. And if they did, they would give you one. This isn't worth it. You're not going to shoot me. Now, that could be bat guiding, but just stuff like that. I was just like, oh, wow, okay. I started understanding Batman more than, because when you just know him on a pop culture level, you don't know that, oh, he thinks like that. You just think the gadgets and all this stuff and Jack Nicholson. But when you're reading the books, when you're reading the books, you're like, oh, there's levels to this. There's layers to this. And that's why, that really started winning me over.
Absolutely. Tim, do you have any thoughts about this series?
If I could not be ostracized, I will have to admit that I have not read all of No Man's Land. I've read a good amount of it, but I had not read all of it. It came at a period of time when I actually backed off and dropped a lot of comics that I was buying monthly at that time. And it's like when I'm seeing 4 Batman books, and it's like you feel like you have to buy all the Batman books in order to follow anything. It's like it just didn't fit the finances at that time. So no, I have not. I did not buy a lot of them. I just saw some of them, but not a lot.
Right. I can understand that, because when I went through and read it the first time, and then I read it in trade, it was like, oh, I missed this part and I missed this part. And at the time, I didn't remember missing it, but it was a lot of different chapters and a lot of different stories. So.
And I read it all in trade form.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. And you can do that nowadays. And now in the digitals, it's like, oh yeah, it's on my list of things I need to get to.
Right.
But, one of the things that always struck me about it, what I had read so far, is a lot of things that AJ already touched on, but, in deeper is just how much it dealt with human stories, and even not the Batman family characters as being the centerpieces of it. It was a real big character exploration of normal people living through this extraordinary situation, and how they dealt with it as individuals and as a community, building a community that's been shattered, and what that looks like. So it was just, that's one of the things that always stood out to me, is just that part of it, when they would touch on that. And of course, the thing that has to hook me in is the superheroes, because I love superheroes. That's why I buy these comic books in the first place. So having them being part of the story was still essential, but the deeper things about finding all these people who are living this life in this no man's land was really pretty amazing. Very appealing and powerful sorts of stories they were able to craft. And I know that's what they were pulled themselves in on. It's like in terms of scope, as an event, I do kind of think that it's in the same ballpark from an event standpoint as the whole Nightfall, Night Quest, Night's End sort of thing, in terms of scope, how long it went, how the characters all got pulled into it, or even Superman's Death of Superman, World Without, and Reign of the Superman. In terms of scope and how much and how long the story went, it felt similar to those.
Yeah.
But the kinds of stories they did were, so human nature and so personal. That's what really sets it apart. And as you said, Bill, nothing else has done it really that way in DC.
Right. And I think it was because there were so many, it was an overall story, but there were so many smaller stories within that story. And we hadn't really seen anything like that before. So It just stood out as something that, as you said, the characters make it interesting. Them in these situations, like you get The Walking Dead, for instance, and the most interesting thing isn't the zombies or isn't it's how the people deal with situations, and I think that's what was the most interesting thing about No Man's Land is people being in the situation. You had the Gotham City PD, you had all the villains in different areas and the people around and how it affects them, and they even get Lex Luthor dropped in there, which interesting. And then poor Gordon going through what he's had to go through is just a massive event.
When systems break down, what will happen with human nature? That's what it was about.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
Right.
what ended up being in literature and television and movies right after that.
Yep. That's true.
Mm-hmm.
That's true, because one of my favorite TV series of all time was Lost.
Mm.
And you put a group of individuals in a no-win situation. They don't know what to do. They don't have food. They don't have this. They don't have that. And I saw No Man's Land directly from that. It's like, okay, we saw that we've seen this before. They just copied it differently. Anything else you want to add there before we move on?
Yeah, and just the slick way in Batman No Man's Land, you alluded to it, how they're like, oh yeah, and by the way, here's a new Batgirl. Like this Cassandra Cain character, you probably didn't see this coming. She was a runner for Barbara Gordon as Barbara Gordon was doing her Day 5 in No Man's Land Diary. And bam, yeah, she's a new Batgirl. This was the, what did they call it on DC OCD? The reason why we did it.
Right.
Yeah.
The launcher.
Category.
Yeah.
The launcher. Yeah, bam. We just launched this new character, Batgirl. Here you go. Beautiful stuff.
Yeah, great stuff. So Tim Price.
Yes.
What did you bring for us to discuss?
Well, we have AJ bringing a very thoughtful, dramatic character exploration of the human condition, and I bring the popcorn munching summer blockbuster event of 10 Nights of the Beast. I will always defend this 4-issue series. It was still relatively early in my collecting of Batman's regular series, and I really dug the creative team of Jim Starlin and Jim Aparo. I thought that they had a lot of good stories together, of the two Jims, and a lot of what Starlin did, I could see it kind of being laid as the groundwork by Frank Miller, telling things so much from Batman's first person perspective. A lot of his narration is part of this, and getting into how he thinks and what he does. And then Jim Aparo is just a god in drawing Batman. There's no two ways about it. He is my favorite Batman artist. I think he always will be. And there's no shade on there being other great Batman artists out there. There's plenty of fantastic Batman artists out there. And I love a lot of things I see. But still in all, he's always going to be the Batman artist for me. And so getting to see him do a story that, is like bridging that gap of getting modern for me. It's not a classic story. It's like, this was a modern story for me. And it's like, some stories can be timeless. Some stories can happen at any point in history and they just work just as well. But some stories are rooted and grounded in a particular era. And this particular story is so much a Cold War, or like near the end of the Soviet Union kind of story that you just could not tell any other time. And I find that fascinating, and it just makes it more meaningful to, now maybe makes it more meaningful to someone who's lived through it like myself, but I still feel like that you can look at that historically as well and go like, wow, this gives you a real taste of what it was like to live at this time. So, and it's, I think it's a series that just doesn't get, it gets overlooked, to steal a term from another Batman podcast, is one of those overlooked stories that doesn't get a lot of love. And it kind of does suffer from being at the same era that Frank Miller's things were making such waves. And it was like Jim Starlin's run doesn't necessarily get a whole lot of attention. It's overshadowed, especially by, the the death of Jason Todd, which is coming fairly soon after this.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. I just really dug this story. It was a thriller. It's a high stakes spy international mystery story. You have a KGB agent, a CIA agent, FBI agents, all sorts of people talking about the Star Wars Defense Initiative, and we have
that's the whole story. This whole story was around the Star Wars,
Yeah. And you have a villain with a perfectly awful pun of a name, KG Beast. Who cannot love that? I mean, you want to make fun of him now? Absolutely. I have no problem with that, making fun of him now. But oh my gosh, that was just it just sung as a name, KG Beast. It just flows right off the tongue. And then they top it off with having fantastic covers by Mike Zeck. He's so well known, especially on Captain America, but he came and he delivered some amazing Batman covers, especially for this series. So it's one of my all-time favorites, and not necessarily because I'm saying it's one of the best stories ever, and not because I'm saying it has something big to say about Batman. I'm not arguing that. I'm going to say though that it is a great contained read that you can just sit down in a free hour and roll through and have a great time. That's sometimes what I want out of my comics. Sometimes I want to sit down and watch, 2 seasons of streaming a series, and sometimes I just want to chill for a couple hours with a movie, and that's what 10 Nights of the Beast really delivers for you.
No, that was right around the time when I jumped on monthly, because I jumped on right around, I was at 400, and that was one of those early stories that stayed with me. The artwork, of course, Jim, you can't say, I mean, you about said it there. The thing that got me in all this, and I know the ending is somewhat controversial, and people always talk about that and different things.
Right.
But the thing that got me in that story is when Batman has him, caught, and the dude just cuts his arm off.
Yes.
And then he goes about his business and just puts a knife on there, or machine gun, or whatever it is, and it's like, holy crap, is he ever going to get this guy? So yeah, that was one of the parts for me in that book. But that was a book that I remember quite fondly. I mean, the ending, you can say what you want about it, and I mean Tom King actually kind of made fun of the ending and then did the same thing, somewhat similar in his run, but then they called the police or the FBI in to let him know where he was and that sort of thing. It happened. It happened.
Right. Well, that I like the, at the time, especially, a lot of DC was getting dark. So, if you were buying into the darkety dark of DC Comics, then that would have been right tonally in the same vein. But also, you can get back to the golden age Batman and yes, there was plenty of stories in those 30s and 40s where Batman just left the bad guy to die in a burning building and things like that. And, it's that Batman who's going to let poetic justice serve the day. So you kind of, it's not, and I'll freely admit, it's like, no, I don't really feel like that's something Batman should do all the time.
Right.
But for that particular story, it was amazingly effective. But also at my own headcanon, it's like, no, he's not really leaving him down there because, honestly, with how awful a villain the Beast was, I wouldn't trust him not to get out.
Right.
Just, so it's like Jim Starlin left it a little too open-ended, whereas my own headcanon is like, no. Someone had to go and follow that up because it's just, you can't deal with letting him get away. But yeah, I mean, big moments like the Beast chopping off his own arm, which also was like a case of, when you think about it too much, like, yeah, he wasn't very smart there because he just had the axe and he was chopping through the wire before. Why didn't he just chop through the wire there? It's but you also go like, well, did he have an angle to do it on? I don't know. And I'm overthinking it, but it still had big stakes and big movements. And the Beast was terrifyingly effective. I mean, most of the targets that he was shooting for, he killed.
Oh, yeah.
He killed lots of innocent people along the way. He was right there in line with any other horrendous Batman villain who just casually killed hundreds of people in a single issue. Like, I mean, I'm reading an old issue featuring Dr. Phosphorus just like a year or two ago. It's like, he killed a whole stadium full of people. What the freak? And that was from the 70s.
Yeah.
So, it's like, well, the bodies just pile up in Gotham City. I'm sorry. But there's a lot of fun in that story. And that there's like, and as much as we get on Jason Todd post-crisis before his death, it's like Jason Todd was pretty darn interesting and effective in this story. There's a fantastic one page where there's like 16 panels that are like showing the almost cinematic of Jason Todd stopping a suicide bomber. And it's just frame by frame, and it's beautiful, and just makes so like, oh yeah, Jason Todd is awesome. I'm sorry when we had him in this era. But then we also have the fun of Jim Aparo things thrown in. There's Commissioner Gordon disguised as Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
Alfred disguised as Ronald Reagan. There's Batman disguised as a cop, rips off the cop face mask because he's wearing his Batman mask underneath. Yes.
That might have been the greatest moment ever, because that's a very Silver Age thing they used to do all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it just played to a lot of those fun strengths, and I think it, like I said, it's a 4-issue investment. So, when you can read that story, and you're in the mood for just Batman fun and not Bat God, because if he was Bat God, the Beast wouldn't have stood a chance. But it's like, no, he was a threat. It's just a fun read. I felt like. AJ, have you ever read 10 Nights of the Beast yourself?
I've never read 10 Nights of the Beast, Batman 417, cover date March 88. I tell you what, everything you just said, I have it queued up. It has me very interested, because I'm loving what you're saying. One, you talk about how, your love for Jim Aparo's Batman and reading Batman Outsiders with you. I can see that, and I can see how Rose before Jim Aparo led to Jim Aparo's Batman, and then the Rose afterwards are coming from Jim Aparo's Batman in some form or fashion. I also like what you're saying as far as, hey, this is a story, there are some stories like, man, it's timeless, but this is a story of its time. And because I'm older now, sometimes I like that. Like, listen, despite what you see on the news and all this stuff, this is still the best time to be alive. Like, well, AJ, what about the 1600s? You go do it. I'm not doing it. All right. What about the 1940s? They said 1940s, America was awesome. You can go do that. I'm not doing it. So, but sometimes I do want to read something of his time, or I want to read something or watch something of his time. Like, why are you watching like this low budget science fiction show in 1976? You know why? Because like when I was a kid, I would see that, and it's just a good way for my mind to unwind. Right. So I want to revisit a time or whatever. So I love the whole thing of, you know what? No, this, if I'm a younger person and I didn't go through the Cold War, but I would like to know what it was like, I'm going to read this. I'm going to read about people probably blogging about it to give me cultural context or podcasting about it. I just love that as a concept. And so, yeah, I will definitely be reading this 4-part story. I'm sold.
You're welcome.
And I like KGBs. I like saying KGBs. I think that is wild. It's like, remember wrestling? They would, the Iron Sheik.
Oh yeah.
And also it's an apt time to be reading this because history is repeating itself.
This is true.
And I'm not talking about Creed or Creed Part 2 and that. I'm talking about the world.
Well, and you're not wrong about the wrestling thing, because you look at his outfit and the mask he wears. It's like, there's a strong influence of luchador masked wrestling from his costume. And it's like when he and Bane briefly show up together, it's like, oh yes, luchador. You can see it happening.
Yeah, definitely. That was a character I thought that would never show up again, and I don't know if they could have done anything. And he's shown up at times. I feel like I don't know if they know what to do with him, but there's been some interesting stories with him in it. But that definitely was a story that always stuck with me. Always. And it's a time, that I just jumped into Batman comics. So I'm going to remember things more fondly in that particular era than something that I read tomorrow that might have been back in the early 80s or the 70s, just because I was getting every issue of that monthly, and I was very excited about Batman at the time. Very excited,
Mm-hmm. Nice.
So yeah, I appreciate you guys coming on. It was a lot of fun. Couple stories. They're excellent stories. If there's people out there that haven't read, what have you been reading? Come on, let's get reading. But yeah, I always enjoy listening to you guys on your podcast there. So I wanted to have you guys on and talk a little Batman comics. It's always fun to reach out and talk to different people who have different opinions and different things like that. So I appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much. And your show is always great and has so many great comics covered by it. Always fun to see that. And I follow you even more on the Twitters and seeing what you guys are talking about over there and what stories coming along. So always appreciate that.
Thank you for having us on here. You made me go back and reread the Three Jokers. I realized, like, you know what? I kind of just sped read through that. I wasn't sitting down and enjoying it. So I was like, let me give this a relook. And I commend you on, you guys were covering a lot of volumes of new stuff.
Yeah.
That was wild. And I've been trying to hold back from doing this throughout the whole recording, but I got to do it. It's the Bat Pod. I had to get it out.
I might have to keep that forever. That might have to be the beginning now. I know you wanted to say that for how long? How long have you wanted to say that for?
Ever since you asked us to come on here. I gotta do
it. So let me just let you all, let everybody know what shows you do and where we can find you guys.
Go for it, Tim.
Okay, sure. I'll take it off. First off, we have the Outcasters, a Batman and the Outsiders podcast, which you can follow on Twitter at Bat Outcasters. And you have our Cassandra Cain Batgirl podcast. And you can find that Twitter feed at Huntress Podcast, which is because it shares a feed. Both of these share the feed with the Huntress Podcast. You find us on the web at thehuntress.podcast.com or on your favorite podcatchers with Batgirl/Huntress Podcast. You can find me on Twitter at TimPrice17. And let's see what other wonderful program we have on the Huntress Podcast includes like Feathers and Foes, a Birds of Prey podcast, and where you guys are covering all sorts of things Birds of Prey-ish. And your Huntress podcast, you just started doing some
Detective Comics, like 1036.
New comics and relatively new comics. Yeah. Detective and the Justice Society of America series. So new things that are in the new.
We talk about the Huntress, Helena Bertinelli and Helena Wayne, respectively.
Yeah, all the Helenas. And in that same vein, we cover all of the Batgirls because on the Batgirl Cassandra Cain show, we are covering Batgirls, featuring both Cassandra and Stephanie Brown as our starring Batgirls. That's been a lot of fun series. That's been a great read, and we've enjoyed it quite a bit. So come and listen to us gush. What did I miss, AJ? What else do I have?
You covered it all. And I'm realizing, we are pretty bat-centric. Batty. Hey, batty.
Or bat adjacent. We're bat and we're bat at least bat adjacent as well.
Yeah, that sounds better. Yeah,
we're part of the problem.
Or we have a problem, one or the other.
Yeah.
Could be. So, no, thank you all. You all been great. So I really appreciate coming on again. So.
No, thank you for having us. It's been fun.
No problem. The check is in the mail.
Hey, I'm smiling and blushing.
Until next time, same bat time, same bat channel. We will see you later.